People of Earth, it said in flawless language that seemed to bypass translation altogether. I am High Commander Drac of the Draconian Empire. Your planet has been selected for integration into our domain. Professor Kim's coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. The reptilian continued speaking. You have 30 standard days to dismantle your governments and prepare for our arrival. Resistance is inadvisable. The transmission ended abruptly. Professor Kim stood frozen for several seconds before reaching for his phone with trembling hands. He dialed a number he rarely used. Hannah, are you seeing this? He asked when she answered. I'm looking at it right now, Dr. Hannah Park replied, her voice unnaturally calm. Every device on the planet received the same message. It's impossible, Professor Kim whispered. The energy required to broadcast simultaneously to billions of devices. Come to the bunker, she interrupted. Now, bring your phase displacement research. Professor Kim packed his research files quickly. Outside, the streets were already filling with people despite the early hour. Some stood in shocked silence, staring at their phones. Others ran in panic, shouting about the end of the world. By sunrise, military vehicles patrolled Seoul's streets. Emergency broadcasts instructed people to remain calm, but fear had already taken hold. Lines formed outside grocery stores and gas stations. Banks closed their doors as crowds attempted to withdraw their savings. Professor Kim's government escort arrived at noon. The driver said nothing as they sped through increasingly chaotic streets, heading south toward Jeju Island. The underground facility beneath Jeju had been built during the Cold War. Steel doors opened as they approached, revealing a bustling command center where military personnel and scientists worked frantically. Dr. Park met him at the entrance. Her usual neat appearance had given way to rumpled clothes and disheveled hair. Dark circles showed beneath her eyes. You made it, she said, giving him a quick hug. Follow me. She led him through crowded hallways to a secure conference room. Inside, screens displayed news from around the world. United Nations emergency sessions, military mobilizations, religious gatherings, mass panic. The President will address the nation in 1 hour, Dr. Park explained. But first we need your insight. Colonel Taewon Lee stood at the head of the table, his uniform crisp despite the chaos. Maps and satellite images covered the walls. Professor Kim, the colonel nodded. Welcome to what might be humanity's last stand. That's a bit dramatic, Professor Kim replied, setting down his research materials. We know nothing about these draconians yet. We know more than you think, Colonel, Lee said grimly. He pressed a button, and the screen showed strange images, spacecraft of various designs, all damaged or destroyed. Alien bodies, not all reptilian, star charts with red markers. These transmissions have been intercepted over decades, Colonel, Lee explained. We've pieced together that the Draconians have conquered at least 17 civilizations across what they call the local cluster. Professor Kim studied the images. How advanced are they? Their technology appears to be at least 2 centuries beyond ours, Dr. Park said, pulling up comparison charts. Their energy production alone makes our nuclear capabilities look like children's toys. And their military record? Professor Kim asked. Colonel Lee's expression darkened further. Perfect. Most planets fell within days of their arrival. None lasted more than a week. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Earth's combined military forces would be hopelessly outmatched. Then why give us 30 days? Professor Kim wondered aloud. Why not just attack? Psychological warfare, Colonel Lee suggested. They enjoy watching species tear themselves apart in panic. Or resource efficiency, Dr. Park added. If governments surrender peacefully, they don't need to waste resources on conquest. Professor Kim opened his research files. I've been working on something they might not expect. He explained his phase displacement theory, the idea that objects could exist in slightly different quantum states, essentially making them invisible and untouchable to each other, despite occupying the same physical space. In theory, he said, we could shift ourselves partially out of phase with normal spacetime. They would see us but couldn't interact with us. And could we do the reverse? Colonel Lee asked, eyes widening. Make them disappear? Possibly, Professor Kim nodded. but the energy requirements would be enormous. We'll get you whatever you need, Dr. Park said firmly. A young technician burst into the room. They're broadcasting again. The screen switched to the reptilian face of Commander Drac. This time the background showed what appeared to be a command bridge, with other Draconians working at stations. To demonstrate our sincerity, the commander spoke, we have neutralized a small orbital object circling your planet. The image changed to show a satellite exploding silently in space. This was accomplished from our current position beyond your solar system, Drac continued. When our fleet arrives, resistance will be futile. We await your surrender. The transmission ended. Colonel Lee immediately checked his tablet. It was to the International Space Station, he said quietly. 400 personnel gone instantly. Dr. Park turned to Professor Kim, her eyes reflecting the horror they all felt. We have 30 days, Professor Kim said quietly, his resolve hardening. Let's make them count. 30 days passed, like water through fingers. The world changed in that month. Some people ran, some prayed, some fought among themselves. But, in the underground facility on Jeju Island, Professor Kim and his team worked without stopping. The morning of the 30th day dawned clear and beautiful. Then the sky darkened as if storm clouds had gathered. But these were not clouds. They're here, Dr. Park whispered, looking at the satellite feeds. Thousands of ships appeared from nowhere, massive metal structures blocking the sunlight. The first attacks came within minutes. Earth had prepared as best it could. Every missile, every fighter jet, every weapon humanity possessed, launched in a coordinated strike that lit up the sky. For a brief moment, hope flickered. Then the smoke cleared. The Draconian ships remained, untouched. In the command center, screens showed cities around the world. Smaller Draconian vessels descended toward major population centers. Seoul was among the first. The quiet of Professor Jun Kim's laboratory shattered when the screens flickered to life. It was 3:27 a.m., and he had been running quantum calculations all night. The face that appeared made him stumble backward. Green scales shimmered under harsh light. Vertical pupils narrowed as the creature began to speak. Colonel Lee watched the feeds from his hometown, his face hard as stone. Our air defense systems are firing everything we have, he reported. The missiles, they just vanish before impact. Some kind of defense field. Professor Kim looked up from his work. Can we see their technology better now? Any readings on their energy signatures? Yes, Dr. Park said, studying data streams. Their ships operate on principles similar to your theories, Professor. They're manipulating quantum fields, but in a crude way compared to what we're attempting. Below ground, the bunker shook as something heavy landed nearby. Dust fell from the ceiling. They've found us, Colonel Lee said. How much longer do you need? Professor Kim typed furiously at his console. Hours at minimum. The quantum entanglement matrix is stable, but we need more power to expand the field beyond this facility. I'll buy you time, Colonel Lee said simply, checking his weapon. The outer defenses should hold for a while. On screens around them, the world fell. Draconian landing craft touched down in major cities. Their ground forces emerged, towering reptilian soldiers with armor that glinted in the sun. When human forces fired upon them, bullets bounced off their scales. Dr. Park worked alongside Professor Kim, connecting power sources to their prototype device. It sat in the center of the room, a jumble of equipment surrounding a crystal sphere that glowed with soft blue light. If we can't expand the field, she suggested, we could create multiple smaller fields. Target their command ships, Professor Kim nodded. Good idea. We'll need to identify their communication patterns first. Above ground, the situation grew worse by the hour. Reports came in from around the world. The Draconians weren't just killing. They were capturing. Humans were being loaded onto transport ships, tagged with strange devices that controlled their movements. In orbit around Earth, High Commander Drac watched with satisfaction. This was his 15th planetary conquest, and one of the easiest so far. Begin population processing, he ordered. Standard categorization protocols. Workers, researchers, and potential soldiers separated. His second-in-command bowed. The humans are fighting back harder than expected, Commander. Drac made a dismissive gesture. They always fight. It changes nothing. The second day of the invasion brought more of the same. Human resistance continued but weakened. Major militaries had been crushed. Only scattered forces remained, fighting from hidden locations. In the Jeju bunker, progress continued slowly. The team worked without sleep, fueled by fear and determination. "We've mapped their communication network," Dr. Park announced. "They use quantum entanglement for instant communication across their fleet." "That's our target," Professor Kim said. "If we can disrupt their entanglement field, we might be able to isolate individual ships." Colonel Lee entered the lab, his uniform torn and dirty. Fighting had reached the upper levels of the bunker. "We have maybe 12 hours before they break. Through our final defenses," he reported. The third day dawned with humanity on the edge of defeat. Most governments had fallen. Billions were under Draconian control. But then, something changed. A small Draconian scout ship, operating deep in the Pacific Ocean near the Mariana Trench, vanished from all monitoring systems. One moment it was scanning the ocean floor, the next nothing. No explosion, no distress signal. Simply gone. The report reached High Commander Drac within minutes. "Explain," he demanded. His officers checked their instruments. "Unknown, Commander." All readings were normal until they weren't. The ship's quantum signature simply disappeared. Drac frowned. This was unusual. His ships did not malfunction. "Send another scout to investigate," he ordered. In the Jeju bunker, alarms suddenly sounded. Dr. Park rushed to a monitor. "Something's happening," she said, excitement in her voice for the first time in days. One of their ships disappeared near the Mariana Trench. Professor Kim joined her, studying the readings. "That's where we placed the first test device 3. Weeks ago. It was only supposed to create a small displacement field. But the ocean depth must have amplified the effect," Dr. Park finished his thought. "The pressure at that depth, combined with our quantum field." Hope flickered in their exhausted eyes. "Can we replicate it?" Colonel Lee asked. "Create more of these fields?" Professor Kim nodded slowly. "If one small device can affect their ships, our main prototype could do much more." For the first time since the invasion began, they allowed themselves to believe that humanity might have a chance. On his command ship, High Commander Drac received another troubling report. The second scout ship sent to the Mariana Trench had also vanished. "A malfunction," he said, but doubt had crept into his voice. "Continue as planned." The Draconian flag flew over the ruins of Seoul. 2 weeks had passed since the invasion began. The reptilian soldiers patrolled streets littered with broken glass and abandoned vehicles. Humans moved in orderly lines, devices attached to their necks that would paralyze them if they stepped out of line. A processing center had been established in what was once the Olympic Stadium. Thousands of humans passed through each day, sorted into categories based on strength, intelligence, and potential usefulness to the Empire. "Group 7, proceed to transport Vessel 4, announced an automated voice as another 100 humans were marched toward the waiting ships. But beneath the appearance of total control, something was wrong. Reports came in daily of missing Draconian vessels, a patrol ship near Mount Fuji, a transport carrier over the Amazon rainforest, a communications relay above Antarctica. All vanished without warning or explanation. High Commander Drac paced the bridge of his flagship, tail swishing in. Agitation. 300 ships, he hissed. 300 ships unaccounted for. This is unprecedented. His second-in-command, a battle-scarred veteran named Krell, approached cautiously. "Perhaps this species has capabilities we overlooked," he suggested. Drac. Whirled, eyes blazing. "Impossible! They're primitives! Their most advanced weapons couldn't even scratch our smallest vessel." "Yet ships continue to disappear," Krell said quietly. Drac slammed his clawed hand onto a console. "Increase ground forces. Find their resistance leaders and eliminate them. I want examples made in every major city." Far below the angry commander, deep in an abandoned gold mine beneath the Korean mountains, 3 humans gathered around a small blue device that hummed softly. Professor Kim looked older than his 60 years now. 2 weeks of hiding, moving only at night, surviving on whatever food they could find, had taken its toll. But his eyes remained sharp as he adjusted the controls on the device. The prototype works better than we hoped, he said. We've established quantum displacement bubbles in 7 locations worldwide. Any draconian technology entering these fields is shifted slightly out of phase with our dimension. Colonel Lee, his uniform replaced by dirty civilian clothes, studied the holographic map showing the 7 locations. What exactly happens to them? He asked. They still exist, Professor Kim explained, but in a parallel pocket dimension we've created. They can see our world but can't interact with it, and we can't see them at all. Dr. Park typed on a makeshift computer assembled from salvaged parts. Her once neat lab coat was torn and stained. The best part is they can't communicate with their fleet. As far as their command structure knows, the ships simply vanish. Can we make more of these bubbles? Colonel Lee asked. With enough power, yes, Professor Kim nodded. But we've discovered something else too. Dr. Park took over. Their troops have neural implants at the base of their skulls. These connect them to their command network. We've found that specific radio frequencies can disrupt these implants. She held up a modified handheld radio. It doesn't kill them, but it causes temporary paralysis. Enough time to escape, or if necessary, to use conventional weapons against them. Colonel Lee allowed himself a small smile for the first time in weeks. So we can fight back. Exactly, Dr. Park said. We're distributing both technologies through the resistance network. Small displacement devices near key draconian installations and modified radios to resistance cells. Professor Kim pointed to different locations on their map. We have active cells in 23 countries now. The displacement technology is harder to reproduce, but the radio disruptors are simple enough that anyone with basic electronics knowledge can build them. The entrance to their hideout opened, and a young messenger slipped in. He carried a backpack full of supplies and news from other resistance groups. They're getting desperate, the young man reported after catching his breath. Executions in public squares, whole neighborhoods punished for single acts of resistance. Colonel Lee's expression hardened. That means we're hurting them. There's more, the messenger continued. They're pulling troops from the countryside, concentrating them in cities, and they're grounding larger ships, keeping them away from areas where vessels have disappeared. They're afraid, Dr. Park realized. Outside, their hidden bunker, the occupation continued. In New York, Draconian soldiers gathered humans in Times Square to witness the execution of captured resistance fighters. In London, entire city blocks were leveled as punishment for a single sabotaged patrol. But for every act of draconian violence, the resistance grew stronger. The modified radios spread from person to person, city to city. Small teams ambushed. Isolated patrols, using the frequency disruptors to render the fearsome soldiers temporarily helpless. And ships continued to vanish. A major troop carrier over the Indian Ocean. A command relay station above Moscow. A mining operation in Australia. All gone in an instant, trapped in a pocket dimension from which there was no escape. On his flagship, High Commander Drac received increasingly disturbing reports. We've lost contact with the Sydney Processing Center, Krell reported, and our forces in Brazil report widespread disruption to neural implants. Drac's scales darkened with rage. How? How? They had nothing that could challenge us. Unknown, Commander, Krell replied, but resistance activities have increased by 300% in the last 5 days. Find their leaders, Drac snarled. Find whatever technology they're using. I want it destroyed and its creators made examples of. In the mountain hideout, Professor Kim made final adjustments to a larger displacement device. This one will create a bubble 5 kilometers wide, he explained. If we can place it near one of their major landing zones, we could trap hundreds of ships at once, Colonel Lee finished. Dr. Park looked up from her work. The resistance cell in Japan has successfully built 3 disruptor amplifiers. They can now affect draconian troops over a wide area. How long before we can launch a coordinated counterattack? Colonel Lee asked. Professor Kim considered. 2 more weeks, perhaps. By then, we should have enough displacement devices and disruptors to make a real difference. 2 weeks, Colonel Lee nodded. I'll spread the word. All cells should prepare but remain in hiding until then. As they worked, a small radio in the corner brought scattered reports from around the world. Despite the draconian occupation, despite the overwhelming odds, humanity was not defeated. Not yet. The morning air felt different. 1 month had passed since the Draconians arrived, 1 month of occupation, of humans being processed and shipped off-world. But today would be different. Colonel Lee watched the sunrise from a hillside, overlooking what remained of Seoul. Beside him, a young resistance fighter checked her watch. "It's time," she whispered. Colonel Lee raised an old-style radio to his lips. "Operation Displacement begins now." Across the planet, at precisely the same moment, thousands of resistance members emerged from hiding. In Seoul, they carried small devices that looked like ordinary radios. In London, they moved through underground tunnels beneath Draconian patrols. In Cairo, they positioned themselves near processing centers. Professor Kim sat in the mountain bunker surrounded by equipment. 7 larger quantum generators had been positioned around the world, hidden in places the Draconians wouldn't think to look. An underwater cave in the Philippines, a mine shaft in South Africa, the basement of a destroyed museum in Rome. "All generators report ready," Dr. Park announced, monitoring communications. Professor Kim nodded. Phase 1. Neural disruption. In cities worldwide, resistance fighters activated their devices. The air seemed to vibrate with an invisible pulse. On street corners, in control centers, aboard landed ships, Draconian soldiers suddenly froze. Their bodies shook, their weapons dropped from scaled hands. Many collapsed to the ground, eyes wide but bodies unresponsive. In New York, humans who had been lined up for processing watched in amazement as their captors fell. In Moscow, resistance fighters emerged from hiding to drag paralyzed Draconians away from their posts. In Tokyo, a processing center that had been shipping humans to off-world labor camps was overwhelmed within minutes. Colonel Lee led his team down the hill toward Seoul. "The effect will only last 20 minutes, he reminded them. "Move quickly." Inside, the occupied city, they found chaos. Draconian soldiers lay helpless in the streets. Human captives freed themselves from processing lines. For the first time since the invasion, the reptilian occupiers looked vulnerable. Above Earth, High Commander Drac received alarming reports from every corner of the planet. "Neural network failure across all ground forces," reported a frantic officer. "We've lost control of processing centers in 17 major cities." "Impossible," Drac hissed. "Activate the backup systems." "Already tried, Commander. Something is interfering with the neural frequency." Drac slammed his fist down. "Send in the secondary wave. All reserve troops to major population centers immediately." Dr. Park watched on monitors as Draconian dropships began descending toward Earth's surface. "They're sending reinforcements," she warned. "Phase 2, now." Professor Kim activated the quantum displacement network. The 7 generators powered up simultaneously, creating overlapping fields that spread across key areas. Draconian dropships approaching these zones simply vanished. One moment they were there, the next, gone, shifted into the pocket dimension. Around major resistance strongholds, the displacement fields created safe zones. Draconian sensors could no longer detect what happened inside these areas. Their weapons couldn't penetrate the quantum barrier. "It's working," Dr. Park said, watching the data flow across her screens. "We've created 23 safe zones worldwide." Outside these zones, the battle continued. The neural disruptors had to be recharged, but they had given the resistance the advantage they needed. Captured Draconian weapons were turned against their former owners. Human prisoners were freed by the thousands. On his command ship, High Commander Drac watched in growing horror as his invasion force crumbled. "This is impossible," he hissed. "No pre-space civilization has ever resisted us for this long. No species has ever countered our neural network." His second-in-command approached cautiously. "Commander, we've lost contact with 40% of our ground forces, and any ship entering these marked areas never returns." "What are they doing to them?" Drac demanded. "Unknown, sir. They simply disappear." Far away, in the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, news of the Draconian failure spread quickly. The Council had gathered for an emergency session, with representatives from 24 spacefaring species attending. The Draconian representative, a high-ranking official named Score, faced uncomfortable questions. "How is it that your mighty So our Armada is being thwarted by a species that hasn't even achieved interstellar travel? Asked the Arcturian ambassador, his blue skin glowing with barely concealed satisfaction. A temporary setback, Score insisted. These humans have discovered some primitive trick, nothing more. Yet this primitive trick has cost you over 500 ships, noted the Centauri delegate. Perhaps the great Draconian Empire isn't as invincible as it claims. Back on Earth, Colonel Lee's team secured the main processing center in Seoul. Freed humans joined the resistance by the hour. Similar reports came in from around the world, but Professor Kim knew their advantage wouldn't last forever. The Draconians would adapt, find counters to their technology. In the mountain bunker, he worked frantically on calculations, searching for a solution. Dr. Park assisted, running simulations on their makeshift computers. Suddenly, Professor Kim stood up straight. "I've got it," he said quietly. Dr. Park looked at his calculations. Her eyes widened. "Can we really do this?" "We can expand the displacement field to planetary scale," Professor Kim explained, "but we'll need to coordinate all 7 generators simultaneously. The power requirements are enormous." Colonel Lee arrived at the bunker as they were discussing the plan. His uniform was torn, and a bandage covered a wound on his arm. "The Draconians are regrouping," he reported. "They've figured out how to shield their neural implants, and they're bombarding our displacement fields with some kind of quantum resonance weapon." Dr. Park looked grave. "How long before they break through?" "Hours, maybe a day at most," Colonel Lee replied. Professor Kim showed him the new calculations. "If we succeed with this plan, we can remove the entire Draconian presence in one move." Colonel Lee studied the plan, then nodded grimly. "And if we fail, then humanity falls," Professor Kim replied. "But at least we tried." 2 months of war had changed High Commander Drac. His scales had dulled. His eyes had sunk deep into his skull, but his anger burned hotter than ever. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by screens showing his damaged fleet. Half of his mighty armada was gone. Thousands of ships lost, millions of soldiers vanished, all because of one small backward planet that should have fallen in days. "Enough," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "No more clever tactics, no more patience." His officers watched nervously as Drac called up a holographic map of Earth. "Bring all remaining ships into orbit," he commanded. "Every vessel we have left. We will cleanse this planet from orbit. No more ground operations. No more inexplicable disappearances. Total annihilation." The order spread through the fleet. Ships that had been scattered across the solar system began moving toward Earth. Damaged vessels limped alongside mighty battle cruisers. Scout ships flew in formation with troop carriers. Every ship with working engines joined the gathering storm. On Earth, resistance leaders received the warning from their few remaining orbital satellites. "They're coming," Colonel Lee told Professor Kim and Dr. Park in their bunker beneath Jeju Island. "All of them." Dr. Park studied the data on her screen. "Over 5,000 ships. More firepower than humans have ever seen." Professor Kim looked tired. His hands shook slightly as he worked on the final adjustments to their global displacement network. For 2 months they had fought a guerrilla war against the invaders. Now everything would come down to one desperate gamble. "Are the generators ready?" he asked. "All 7 report operational status," Dr. Park confirmed. "Teams are standing by. In Australia, Brazil, Egypt, Canada, Russia, India, and here." Colonel Lee looked at the simple radio transmitter that would start it all. "How long will we have once they begin their attack?" "Minutes at most," Professor Kim said. "Their weapons will destroy the surface quickly." Outside the bunker, what remained of Earth's military forces prepared for a battle they couldn't win. Fighter jets with almost no fuel left, tanks with dwindling ammunition, soldiers who had been fighting for 2 months straight. In orbit, the Draconian fleet formed a sphere around Earth, weapons powered up, targeting systems locked onto major cities. High Commander Drac raised his hand, ready to give the final order. "Begin the cleansing," he commanded. The first energy beams lanced down toward Earth's surface. They struck the atmosphere and began burning through toward the ground below. In the bunker, alarms screamed. "They've started!" Dr. Park shouted over the noise. "Atmospheric penetration in multiple locations," Professor Kim nodded grimly. Send the signal. All generators activate now. Colonel Lee pressed the transmit button on the radio. A simple tone went out, received by teams at each of the 7 generator locations around the world. All generators online, Dr. Park reported, watching status indicators turn green one by one. Quantum matrix stabilizing. The ground shook as Draconian energy weapons hit somewhere nearby. Dust fell from the ceiling of the bunker. Now, Professor Kim said quietly, pressing the final activation button. For a brief moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the instruments showed 7 massive energy pulses erupting from different points around the globe. They spread outward, merging into a shimmering field that enveloped the entire planet. In orbit, High Commander Drac watched with satisfaction as the first volley of energy weapons struck Earth. Then something strange began to happen. His view of the planet started to waver, as if seen through water. "What is this?" he demanded. "Report." "Unknown energy field surrounding the planet," an officer replied, frantically checking instruments. "It's interfering with our weapons." "Increase power," Drac ordered. "Break through it." But before they could comply, something even stranger occurred. The ship next to Drac's flagship began to fade from view, not exploding, not moving away, simply becoming transparent until it vanished completely. Then another ship disappeared, and another. "What's happening?" Drac roared. "Where are they going?" All around Earth, ship by ship, the mighty Draconian Armada began to vanish. Some tried to flee, engines firing at full power. It made no difference. Within minutes, thousands of ships had faded from normal space. In the Jeju bunker, Dr. Park watched in amazement as their instruments showed the disappearances. "It's working," she whispered. "The displacement field is pulling them into the pocket dimension." Professor Kim nodded, his tired face showing relief. "All of them, just as we planned." Across the galaxy, in the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, pandemonium erupted. Monitoring stations reported the impossible. The entire Draconian invasion force, over 5,000 ships and millions of personnel, had simply vanished. "Emergency session," called the council president. "We must investigate immediately." Investigation teams arrived at Earth a week later. What they found puzzled them greatly. The planet appeared mostly untouched. Its cities showed some damage, but its civilization continued functioning. There were no signs of advanced technology, no evidence of the Draconian fleet. Nothing to explain how a pre-space civilization had apparently defeated the galaxy's greatest military power. What the investigators couldn't detect was that Earth now existed simultaneously in 2 quantum states. In the primary state, humans continued their lives, already beginning to rebuild and adapt salvaged Draconian technology for their own use. In the secondary state, a pocket dimension created by Professor Kim's genius, the entire Draconian fleet found themselves trapped. They could see Earth. Their instruments told them they were in orbit around it, but no matter how they moved or what weapons they fired, they could never reach it. In his flagship, High Commander Drac stared at view screens, showing a planet that remained forever distant, despite his instruments claiming they were in orbit. "How?" he whispered, his proud spirit finally broken. "How did primitives do this to us?" On Earth, Professor Kim, Dr. Park, and Colonel Lee stood outside the bunker for the first time in days. The night sky seemed especially beautiful. Stars shining in a peace that had been hard-won. "The Galactic Council has sent representatives," Colonel Lee said. "They want to meet with Earth's leaders." "Should we contact them?" Dr. Park asked. "Tell them what we did?" Professor Kim looked up at the stars thoughtfully. "Not yet. Let's learn a bit more about our neighbors first." "We have time now, Colonel," Lee agreed. "And we have Draconian technology to study." Dr. Park smiled. "After all, we've discovered something the Draconians never understood." "What's that?" asked Colonel Lee. "Never underestimate a species fighting for its survival," she replied. "Especially not humans. Above them, in the quantum pocket where the Draconian fleet would remain trapped for eternity, High Commander Drac gave orders that would never be carried out to a galaxy that would never hear him again. And on 1,000 worlds across the galaxy, the story began to spread. The tale of how the mighty Draconian Armada vanished on Earth, and how the galaxy still couldn't explain it.